I was bored wiping the floor with the hunter candidates when I finally faced the prodigy everyone talked about. She was indeed quite good, but of course, she was still far from my level. Even so, that fight caught the attention of the strongest hunter, who decided to test me. She reminded me of my days as the legendary hero, and that stirred memories of the final day when meteors fell from the sky. Massive explosions ripping the land open again and again. Smoke and rubble swallowed everything, but from within that destruction something slowly emerged. A massive presence, barely phased, asked him if he had truly managed to endure all of that. Hyeon-seok didn't bother answering right away. He could feel it clearly, his comrades behind him were barely holding on. The saints, the mage, the knight, all of them were struggling just to stay alive. Still, he stood his ground, gripping his weapon tightly, staring straight at the monster. He spoke calmly, almost casually, saying the monster didn't look all that comfortable either. The monster attacked. Hyeon-seok moved at the same time, weapon raised, meeting the blow head-on. Their attacks collided again and again, shockwaves tearing through the battlefield. The sheer power of it forced the mage behind him to deploy a barrier just to keep the others from being erased on the spot. The monster roared, declaring that this land was a kingdom forged by its own fangs and claws. If Hyeon-seok refused to submit, it would tear him to shreds. Attacks flew relentlessly. Hyeon-seok spun his staff like a whirlwind, deflecting and blocking everything that came his way. Then he tightened his grip and muttered that he was done dragging this out. At the tip of his spear, a blinding light began to gather. He fired. The paradox flame burst forward, cleaving through everything in its path. Without giving the monster even a second to recover, Hyeon-seok charged, dashing straight toward it. The two of them screamed at each other as they clashed, bouncing across the battlefield, destroying the terrain wherever they landed. The monster came in with a brutal left uppercut. Hyeon-seok blocked it, but the force still sent him flying backward. Pain exploded through his face as blood trickled from a fresh scratch near his eye. The monster laughed, telling him that an attack like that wouldn't even leave a mark. Hyeon-seok told it not to be so sure. That blow had been more than enough to carve its arrogance. He released the paradox flame again. This time the fire burned even brighter. For a moment everything went silent, then the monster's crown clattered onto the ground. It had finally been subdued. The monster stared at him in disbelief, admitting it never thought a human capable of opposing it could exist. Hyeon-seok replied that it made sense, after all, he wasn't from this world. The monster scoffed, saying he was spouting nonsense to the very end. It didn't matter. Even if it fell now, its body would be absorbed into the earth, and one day it would return. Then it realized something was wrong. It wasn't regenerating, it was being erased. Hyeon-seok calmly told it that it must be surprised its resurrection wasn't working. This flame, paradox flame, was his special ability. Unlike normal fire that burned oxygen, this one fed on abstract concepts. Ego, reason, memories, existence itself. He'd heard the monster had been resurrecting for centuries. That ended now. What was burning wasn't flesh. It was the monster's very being. The monster laughed bitterly, saying that even if it was erased, Hyeon-seok would never be remembered as the hero who saved the world. The comrades he trusted were praying for his death at that very moment. Hyeon-seok said he already knew. The saint cried out, telling him not to listen to those lies. Hyeon-seok answered calmly, exposing everything. The saint had seduced him every day, whispering love, pretending affection. In truth, she loathed him to her core for being an outsider. It was all calculated. When the hunt was over, when it was time to dispose of him, she wanted him to hesitate. He asked her if she could hear him. Her frustration showed clearly on her face. The other two were no different. The knight had been given a national treasure by the emperor, specifically to kill him. The emperor feared Hyeon-seok would one day take the throne. The mage despised him for opposing slavery, for standing in the way of his human experiments. Hyeon-seok had known for 5 years. 5 years ago, he realized they would try to kill him once the monster was gone. The monster said it didn't understand. With power like that, he could have destroyed this world long ago. Hyeon-seok replied honestly, he didn't care about this world at all, he just wanted to go home. 20 years ago, back in 2005, he'd been an ordinary office worker on Earth, long before any of this nonsense. He'd been summoned by someone calling herself a goddess. Stories like that were common, ordinary humans becoming heroes in other worlds, but the world he arrived in was a complete disaster. He tried everything to return. There was no way back, only forward, so he endured. For 20 years he trained, fought, survived. One night when he returned to a village with an injured child, the guards told him it was pointless. The kid would die anyway. Medicine was a waste. This world was cruel enough to look away rather than save the wounded. And the worst part, their medical and hygiene standards were barely better than the Middle Ages. They amputated limbs over minor infections. Healers were all drafted for war. Priests burned villagers alive, claiming possession. There were monsters worse than monsters. Hyeon-seok endured all of it, and now it was finally over. The knight admitted they felt relieved now that the truth was out, but they still couldn't let him live. Hyeon-seok said he truly hated this world. The knight realized it then. While trying to kill a monster, they had created one. Hyeon-seok took a deep breath and told the goddess to keep her promise. The red sky parted, a golden beam descended. The goddess appeared, praising his efforts, saying he had defeated the monster. Hyeon-seok reminded her of her promise to send him back to Earth with his memories, experiences, and soul intact. She smiled, asking if he really hated this world that much. He had power enough to threaten even her. If he returned, all his achievements would vanish. He laughed, telling her to drop the act. He knew she was relieved he was leaving. She admitted it. This world no longer needed a monster. She asked if he would regret it. He said there was only one thing he wanted: to return home. As the light enveloped him, she warned him his original body on Earth had died. She would place him in a new vessel, one destined to die soon. He didn't care. As long as he could go back to Earth, any fate was better than staying here. When he opened his eyes, he stared at a familiar sailing. 20 years later, he had returned. He was now Yu Chanseok, and the hell he thought was over was only just beginning. Yu Chanseok slowly sat up, staring around the room in disbelief. He laughed under his breath, saying he was glad he didn't see those bastards from the other world anywhere nearby. At the very least, he could finally live his life again. When he looked into the mirror, a stranger's face stared back at him. This was his face now, different, unfamiliar, but unmistakably human, and that alone made him feel relieved. He rushed to the faucet and turned it on. Clean water poured out instantly. He stared at it like it was a miracle, muttering that this was real magic. Compared to this, mages were completely useless. He turned on the burner next, watching the flame ignite effortlessly. No firewood. No campfires, no freezing nights, just heat at the push of a button. Then he noticed the chicken nearby. He'd missed this shit. Fried chicken, specifically, the best thing humanity ever created. He hesitated for a second before taking a bite, and the moment he did, his eyes watered. It tasted so good he thought he might cry. He'd missed it that much. All those ordinary things he once took for granted, he could finally have them back. An ordinary life, that was all he wanted, but then he noticed it. Far off in the city, a red beam pierced the sky. He sighed, saying he'd expected as much. Time hadn't stopped while he was gone. Still, no matter how bad this world had become, it couldn't be worse than that other one. He told himself he'd manage. He stepped into the shower, laughing softly as hot water poured down without any effort. Cold air followed with the press of a button. Even the clear sky outside the window felt better than the stench of that other world. As he stared out, he muttered that it was already 2025. He should probably start with some StarCraft later. That was when something slammed against the window. A monster leapt into view, and Chanseok stumbled backward, heart racing, shouting what the hell that thing was. A broadcast immediately blared through the room, announcing that an erosion zone had occurred within the complex. Residents were instructed to evacuate to the underground shelter immediately. Chanseok asked what an erosion zone even was, but it was obvious things were bad. Monsters were everywhere, too many. They began tapping on the glass, their movements frantic and violent. He bolted into the hallway, barely slipping past them. As he ran up the stairs, he glanced back, seeing them swarming below. At one point, he was forced to cling to a window ledge, hanging on as monsters passed right by him. When he finally climbed back up, he let out a shaky breath, saying he was glad he managed to shake them off. That was when he spotted a kid. The boy stared at him, surprised. Chanseok immediately told him it was dangerous and that he needed to hurry to the shelter. The kid asked if he'd seen where the monsters went, saying he was going to kill them and asking if Chanseok wanted to come along. Chanseok stared at him like he was insane and muttered that the kid definitely wasn't right in the head. With that haircut, probably not. That was when he learned the truth. It had been 13 years since Earth became like this. The kid explained that erosion zones were exits, places where monsters spilled out. No one knew why they appeared or when or where. The kid said he'd never go to the shelter. Chanseok couldn't just leave him behind. Chanseok sighed deeply. He'd survived 20 years of hell only to come back and find Earth turning into one too. He wondered what the hell the goddess was thinking. The kid asked if he really didn't know anything. Chanseok made up an excuse, saying he'd lived in America for a while. The kid immediately started rambling about politics, YouTube drama, and some impeached president. Chanseok barely followed any of it. Trying to change the subject, he asked about a hunter the kid liked. The kid's eyes lit up. Her name was Lee Si-yoon, ranked 10th in the world, part of the Janabi Guild. She wielded a greatsword and was currently dealing with an erosion zone somewhere else. Chanseok nodded absently, wondering how ordinary humans were even fighting monsters. In the other world, that had never been the case. The kid started going on about her videos, but Chanseok covered his mouth, telling him to shut it for a second. He peeked around the corner, counting monsters, 5 in sight, 6, including the one hiding. His body felt stronger than average. He was used to fighting multiple enemies. The problem was the kid. Leaving him alone wasn't an option. Then he felt it, something familiar in the air. Mana. He froze. it was the same as the other world. If that was true, things wouldn't be so bad. He gathered what little he could and released an attack. The flame clipped the side of a monster's head and immediately ignited it. Chanseok clicked his tongue, saying the mana he'd built up over 20 years was gone. Still, the paradox flame was engraved on his soul. As long as mana existed in the atmosphere, he could use it. His firepower was pathetic compared to before, but it was enough. The monster burned alive, screaming. The kid stared at him in awe, saying he was amazing. He admitted he hadn't trusted him earlier, but now it was obvious Chanseok had a unique trait. Chanseok laughed it off, saying he was just glad the kid wasn't hurt. The kid ran over, saying the Hunter Academy's official YouTube channel said confirming the kill was important. Chanseok told him to wait. The flame wouldn't go out until the target was dead. Another monster suddenly lunged at the kid. Blood splattered, the kid's eyes filled with tears. Chanseok cursed, saying he didn't know what YouTube was, but the kid definitely needed to stop watching it. He asked to borrow the kid's stick. As the monsters closed in, the kid handed it over. Chanseok moved. Using the stick like a blade, he cleaved through them effortlessly, just like back in the other world. One by one, the monsters fell, bodies split cleanly in half. The kid was speechless. He said Chanseok had to be a hunter hiding his identity. Chanseok sighed, staring at the blood-soaked floor. Even after coming back to Earth, he was surrounded by this stench again. He'd gone through all that hell just to rest. But this world wasn't letting him. If Earth was going to be like this, then it was no different from the place he'd escaped. And he hated that fact more than anything. The underground shelter was already packed by the time they arrived. People were crammed together, fear written all over their faces. The heavy doors slammed shut behind Chanseok and the kid, but the kid just kept yapping like nothing had happened. Then his mother spotted him. She screamed his name and rushed over, pulling him into a tight hug. Only then did Chanseok learn the kid's name was Yoonseok. His mother bowed deeply, thanking Chanseok and apologizing at the same time, saying her son was immature and must have caused trouble. Chanseok glanced at her clothes and could tell immediately she was loaded. Everything she wore screamed money. No wonder the kid acted so spoiled. Before anyone could relax, the entire shelter shook violently. A massive fist smashed straight through the wall. "Holy shit, is that Venom?" the monster roared, its voice echoing through the shelter, and panic exploded. People screamed and ran in every direction. Even Yoonseok shouted that they needed to get the hell out of there. Chanseok clenched his teeth. He hadn't asked for much in life. All he ever wanted was the world he knew, his hometown, and some damn peace. Was that really too much to ask? He looked down at his hand, already scarred again, and called out to the kid. If he was that rich, why the hell was he trying to become a hunter? He could live somewhere safe, tucked away, never needing to fight. Yoonseok answered honestly. His father had died to a monster that appeared inside a bunker, supposedly a safe place. That was when he realized there was no such thing as safety on Earth anymore. No matter how scared he was, no matter how weak he felt, he wanted to become the strongest hunter, wipe out every monster, and save the world. It sounded stupid. Even Yoonseok admitted that himself. But Chanseok cut him off, saying he'd make a fine hunter. He didn't need to be the one to save the world. That part was fine. Yoonseok's mother told him they needed to leave, but Yoonseok shook his head. He couldn't. Someone was still back there fighting. A thunderous shockwave tore through the shelter. Yoonseok turned, eyes wide. There he was. Chanseok stood amid the destruction like a ray of hope. Yoonseok said that was what he wanted to do someday. Saving the world was something someone who'd already done it once would be better at anyway. It was easier the second time around. Sometime later, Chanseok reflected on everything. He'd survived that other world using the knowledge from his past life. And even though he'd promised that kid he'd save the world, he'd done absolutely nothing. He was just grinding league, and it was way too easy. He'd said those words with ambition, standing tall in front of everyone. But that desire didn't last. The only reason he'd saved the world before was because he missed the small, everyday things of Earth. Now those things were all one tap away. Saving the world was a job for hunters. When he checked his phone, reality hit him hard. He was broke. The original owner of his body, Chanseok, had worked in logistics. After his company went bankrupt due to a breach, what they called monster outbreaks, he'd been living off severance pay. But that money was gone now. He'd tried finding another job, but normal hiring barely existed anymore. Companies were collapsing constantly because of breaches. He needed money to survive. He didn't know what else to do. Then it hit him, being a hunter, he had experience, too much of it. So he headed to the association. The place was noisy, packed with hopeful candidates. Some guy was loudly talking to his friends, saying anyone this excited had to be an idiot. Selection exams were basically a joke now. If you showed even a hint of a unique trait, you passed, all small fry. Then someone walked in. She bumped into one of them. The guy snapped, asking who the hell she thought she was. It was Lee Si-yoon. The atmosphere shifted instantly. People whispered, wondering if the Janabi Guild had really come in person to scout someone. Si-yoon scrolled through a tablet and mentioned the first name on her list, Han Sang-ah, whose attribute was lightning. Si-yoon casually asked if she could charge batteries. One of her guards sighed, saying she was a hunter candidate, not a generator. Her control was top-notch, which meant she'd be useful in many situations. Another guard pointed out that real combat was what mattered. Plenty of Academy stars failed in the field. Si-yoon smiled and handed him a snack, saying that was exactly her point. Training and real combat were completely different. Academy students raised in safe environments struggled the most. Still, she thought Sang-ah had potential. She just hoped raising her market value would make her worth recruiting. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. The next candidate was strange, not an academy graduate, just a normal guy. Unprecedented. People laughed, wondering what kind of guts someone like that had to step on stage. That normal guy was Yu Chanseok. And the exam was about to begin. The announcer looked down at his notes and called out the name Yu Chanseok. The rules were explained clearly. No personal weapons allowed, only the ones provided. Fatal blows and killing were strictly prohibited. As he stepped onto the stage, Chanseok thought to himself that since he'd decided to become a hunter, there were only two things that mattered now. First, surviving in a world that was clearly falling apart. Second, eating well and living comfortably. That was it. His opponent scoffed, calling the whole thing ridiculous. Chanseok replied calmly that he needed good results here if he wanted to get recruited. The announcer raised his hand, brought it down sharply, and shouted for them to begin. The other guy charged in immediately, shouting that Chanseok couldn't even gather mana and should be honored to lose to someone like him. He bragged openly, saying he was undefeated in the academy and specialized in spearmanship. Chanseok listened quietly, then he drove his spear straight into the ground. When his opponent thrust forward and hit nothing but air, confusion flashed across his face. He asked where the hell Chanseok had gone. Chanseok appeared behind him. He told him almost casually that he was really clumsy. A punch slammed into the guy's gut. As he doubled over, Chanseok stepped on his foot, preventing him from stumbling back, and followed up with a brutal left uppercut. The impact snapped the guy's head back, his eyes glazing over before he dropped to his knees. Chanseok tilted his head and asked if that was already it. He explained that he'd only used his bare hands because using a spear might seriously hurt him. Honestly, this guy was a complete fraud. There was no way this was the average level of hunters. Up in the stands, Lee Si-yoon stared at the stage, genuinely stunned. She flipped through the tablet again, muttering that he was supposedly just a logistics worker. One of her guards whispered that Chanseok had almost zero mana. To generate that much power without stored mana meant one thing: pure luck. Si-yoon handed him a snack and told him to shut up. The guard froze, then obediently ate it. She narrowed her eyes. Chanseok was deliberately not accumulating mana. The question was how that was even possible. Down below, Chanseok felt something was off. If he wanted to prove himself, he needed to end this decisively. His opponent tried to stand again, trembling, and Chanseok calmly walked over, telling him to relax, it wouldn't be fatal. The guy raised his hands instinctively. Chanseok knocked him out again, twice in one fight. The announcer declared Chanseok the winner, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. People whispered, pointing at him, trying to figure out who he really was. Si-yoon glanced around at the other recruiters, all too busy yapping among themselves. With a faint smile, she decided this was the perfect chance to see what Chanseok was really capable of. Her guard asked where she was going. She said she was going to see the president of the association. Meanwhile, Chanseok continued fighting. Match after match, he used nothing but his bare hands. Each time the result was the same. His opponents crumpled far too easily. Even if they were rookies who'd just become hunters, they were way too weak. No matter how many matches passed, everyone was absolute trash. He couldn't help wondering what the hell they even taught at the academy. Finally, the atmosphere changed. It was Han Sang-ah's turn. The crowd erupted, calling her the long-awaited candidate. Maybe she could finally take down this ridiculous super rookie. Chanseok studied her quietly and admitted that out of everyone he'd seen that day, she had gathered the most mana. For the first time since stepping onto the stage, he felt a flicker of interest. And this time, the fight might actually be worth watching. She scoffed and said he was absolutely nothing, that the only reason he had made it this far was pure luck, and that this was where it would finally end. Yu Chanseok couldn't help but wonder why everyone sounded so painfully cliché. She went on about how he didn't seem to have anything special, how all he did was throw punches, but warned him not to expect any mercy. Of course he did have something special, he just didn't want to use it. If he did, she wouldn't just lose, she'd get wiped out completely. She drew in a deep breath as the announcer called for the match to begin. Yu Chanseok watched closely as lightning gathered along her blade. The moment he realized what she was doing, she had already dashed forward, her sword flashing in a rapid draw. Her eyes widened when she saw him flip cleanly over it. Stunned, she couldn't understand how the hell someone dodged lightning by jumping. Chanseok thought it was interesting. He explained that she was running electricity through both the scabbard and the blade, turning them magnetic. By adding that magnetic pull to her draw speed, the sword fired forward like a railgun. He admitted her technique was impressive, genuinely so, but said she missed something important. When she asked what, he told her she was too obsessed with speed. Because she only thought about attacking faster, she actually ended up being slow where it mattered. To push the blade even further, she had laid down magnetic rails in midair. No matter how fast or powerful an attack was, who in their right mind would get hit when the path was clearly visible? She snapped back, telling him to stop acting smug, insisting she could beat him without even using that technique. Lightning surged toward him again. He sidestepped it casually and asked if she wasn't thinking straight. If he could dodge her fastest move, there was no way something slower would touch him. Frustration twisted her expression. She forced more mana together, electricity screaming as she swung again. Parts of the arena shattered, debris flying toward him. He clicked his tongue and told her she was overdoing it, scraping her mana together by force. If she kept that up, her body would be wrecked long before the fight ended. Closing the distance in an instant, he told her she'd been cool, but it was time to finish this. If it hurt too much, she just needed to raise her hand. His fist slammed into her gut. She gagged, spit spraying as the air was knocked from her lungs. He pulled back, then unloaded without mercy, lefts, rights, equal opportunity punches beating her down like a brutal rhythm. He reeled back once more and drove his fist straight into her face. Her vision went hazy as she collapsed backward onto the floor. The recruiters sat frozen, stunned, whispering among themselves about where the hell this guy had come from. Yu Chanseok muttered that she was definitely stronger than the others, but collapsing from that much meant she relied far too heavily on mana while neglecting her physical training. He watched her carefully, wondering if she'd try to stand again. Instead, her hand rose shakily into the air. He remembered telling her to do exactly that and laughed it off. Another association member rushed over to the announcer and whispered something urgently. The announcer stiffened before addressing the crowd, announcing that the tournament schedule had been changed and that Chanseok would be taking a short break. Chanseok frowned, confused. He thought it was already over. But the announcer continued, explaining that in just a few moments a special match would take place between the tournament winner and a professional hunter. This was happening under special permission from the president himself. The audience was asked for their understanding. The guards around Lee Si-yoon realized she had actually gone through with it. Yu Chanseok noticed the monitors lighting up. Only the audience could see them, but judging by their reactions, the opponent was clearly no joke. Whether it was here or in another world, some things never changed. This was a test. Lee Si-yoon stepped forward, dragging her blade along the floor. She admitted it might be rude to show up unannounced, but there was no better way to confirm his abilities properly. She introduced herself and said the stage had been far too small for him until now. They should fight. He could refuse since it was sudden, but she thought he shouldn't. Yu Chanseok felt it immediately. The pressure, the composure radiating off her wasn't fake. She was the real deal. With his current body even wielding a spear, this would be tough. Still, he agreed. The announcer looked shocked as Chanseok said he was ready to go right now. Honestly, he hadn't even used that much stamina yet. He figured she could tell. She called him bold. He said if he had to fight, now was better. This was the perfect chance to get the best possible result. Facing her would raise his market value nicely. Not long after the match began, the spectators' faces twisted in horror, the announcer looking just as stunned. The only sound echoing through the arena was metal crashing against metal as Lee Si-yoon came down with a heavy swing. Yu Chanseok blocked it head-on, muttering that it was insane for someone her size to wield that much power. The impact pushed him back several steps, but he managed to regain his footing and create some distance between them. He noted that her speed had dropped noticeably compared to the start of the fight. It wasn't that there were no openings, there were. The problem was that with his current body, he simply didn't have the raw strength to force his way through them. She commented that she thought he'd finally get a chance to warm up, but it looked like he might already be running out of gas. Still, he had done better than expected. She'd assumed he would last maybe 5 minutes. 30 minutes was far beyond that. Widening her stance, she charged again, telling him she'd let him rest now. Yu Chanseok took a deep breath. The mana he had gathered was practically non-existent, and the ambient mana in the air was thin. He didn't want to use it, but he didn't have a choice. He needed to activate Paradox Flame. Lee Si-yoon locked eyes with him, sensing that he was about to do something reckless, but she continued her attack anyway. He jumped back, barely avoiding a swing that should have been unavoidable. She snapped, asking what the hell that was supposed to be. As Paradox Flame ignited, it coated his body in pale, unnatural fire. He calmly pointed out that, as everyone could see, his clothes remained completely intact. Unlike normal flames, this fire didn't burn physical matter. Each flame burned something else, abstract concepts used as fuel. At his current output, he could only burn concepts with high ignition points, things like ego or reason. The concept he planned to burn now was something he had accumulated plenty of during the fight: fatigue. He charged forward again, and Lee Si-yoon immediately noticed it. He was faster, way faster. He explained that what he was trading away now was exhaustion itself. Even she had to admit that the skill was insane. She demanded to know how he recovered so quickly as their clash escalated into a full-on brawl. Something felt off. The mana density in the air kept fluctuating wildly, growing thick, then thin, even though the arena's settings hadn't changed. Yu Chanseok explained it plainly. Just as normal fire releases heat when it burns matter, Paradox Flame released mana when it burned abstract concepts. He used mana to ignite it, and then the flame burned his fatigue, releasing mana all over again. A closed loop, an endless cycle. His specialty was attrition warfare. Once he latched onto an opponent, he'd cling to them relentlessly, wearing them down with what was effectively an infinite stamina pool, though even that had limits. Once he started a fight, he never let go. He asked her if she liked persistent people. She said she hated them. He warned her that burning left behind ash. Once something turned to ash, it couldn't be burned again. Paradox Flame worked the same way. Once a concept was fully consumed, only residue remained and the flame would eventually vanish. 4 hours and 20 minutes later, Lee Si-yoon finally stepped back. She admitted he'd lasted far longer than expected and asked if he wanted to keep going. He shrugged and said he was low-key exhausted. Then he forfeited. Lee Si-yoon was declared the winner. This time she pulled out an oversized piece of candy. Her guards stared, confused. She said he worked hard, so she was giving him that, and slipped her business card inside as well. Yu Chanseok stared at it, asking what the hell a Monkey LLC Team 3 partner hunter even was. She told him to call her and left it at that. The announcer declared the hunter selection officially concluded and told Yu Chanseok to head to the award ceremony. He chewed on the candy, muttering that having his hunter license digitally stored on a smartphone was weird. Back in his day, everything had been paper. He skimmed through the contract, noting that it covered pretty much everything. A man approached him, smiling, saying he looked much better in person than on camera. Yu Chanseok asked who he was. The man handed him a business card. Hunter Yoon Seong-hyun, partner hunter of Grand Purity. Yoon Seong said he wouldn't drag this out. He wanted Yu Chanseok on his team. With enough experience under him, he'd definitely shine. Yu Chanseok could tell the man wasn't lying, but he already had a prior engagement with Lee Si-yoon. He said he'd think it over before deciding. Yoon Seong laughed, asking if he really thought he needed to answer right away. He clapped a hand on Yu Chanseok's shoulder, telling him to choose carefully, then promised they'd meet again. The moment he left, Yu Chanseok knew one thing for sure: that guy couldn't be trusted. He immediately called Lee Si-yoon. Introducing himself as Yu Chanseok, she told him she was on the second floor of the association building and sent him the location. The place was called The Hut. A woman welcomed him at the entrance. Lee Si-yoon waved him over and told him to sit. He commented that the cafe's name was strange, and she asked if something happened. He told her about Yoon Seok trying to recruit him, mentioning how massive the guy was. She sighed and said that if Yoon Seok personally took interest in him, other guilds probably wouldn't even dream of recruiting him. Yu Chanseok asked if Monkey LLC was the same. She shook her head, saying she had no intention of recruiting him. That surprised him. He asked why. She suggested he operate independently as a freelancer. He stared at her, stunned. She explained that Yoon Seok had offered him a junior position. When he asked what that meant, she realized he hadn't graduated from the academy and broke it down for him. Within a guild, hunters were divided into junior, senior, and partner levels. Juniors and seniors were salaried workers under a partner hunter. Partner hunters didn't receive salaries, they owned shares and split the guild's profits. It sounded exactly like a law firm. She confirmed it was intentional. The first guild founder had modeled the system after law firms. Yu Chanseok didn't need to belong to a guild or climb the ladder to become a partner. If he got strong and famous enough, they'd come to him on their own. She handed him another piece of candy. He asked what the deal was with that. She explained that without connections or experience, it would be hard for him to get proper requests. She'd handle everything for him free of charge. He didn't understand why she'd go that far. She said that in the future, once he built enough fame to be recruited by a guild, all she wanted was for him to shout out Monkey LLC. Basically, free advertising. He said that just put him in her debt. She slid a document across the table and told him to read it. It was his choice. The request came from Incheon City, involving Jiangdu Island. 2 years ago, they failed to remove an erosion core, leading to the formation of an erosion zone. He asked if he just needed to remove the core. She said no, he'd be patrolling Jiangdu to identify and eliminate any additional cores that appeared. The mission would begin in a month, 5 million up front, 15 million upon completion. He did the math and muttered that risking his life for roughly $13,000 was honestly kind of garbage. She told him that if he wanted more money, he needed to get stronger and more famous. When she asked for his answer, the scene cut to Lee Si-yoon on the car, speaking on the phone. The person on the other end asked who Yu Chanseok was. She said he was a civilian who crushed the tournament barehanded. When asked if that meant he was decent, she said that didn't even begin to cover it. He had lasted 4 hours against her. The voice on the phone suggested that she must have restricted her power. She snapped back that she'd been a hunter for 10 years, fought through hell itself, and should have been able to toy with him. 4 hours was impossible. Even if she were reborn, there would never be another monster like him. The conversation shifted to Jiangdu Island. The caller warned that the mission specifically required experienced hunters, and that no matter how skilled Yu Chanseok was, going alone among veterans would be dangerous. Lee Si-yoon said that wasn't an issue. She had paired him with someone reliable. The boss on the phone agreed, saying Lee Si-yoon was the brain of the organization, and asked if she thinks he would be able to reach her level. Lee Si-yoon answers that if he reaches her level, he would be able to take down even him, the boss. The scene jumped back to a month earlier. A deliveryman struggled up the stairs, muttering under his breath about who the hell would order something this heavy. He double-checked the unit number on the next package, then finally knocked. Yu Chanseok opened the door, pulled the long case inside, and commented that it really was absurdly long. He popped the latches and opened it, nodding to himself. The spear inside would work just fine. Along with it came an elixir, an emergency-use medicine commonly carried by hunters. It was condensed mana, meant for moments when someone desperately needed more. Normally, handling mana was like drawing water from a purifier, regulating the mana in the air, storing it inside the body, and then using it when necessary. The elixir compressed that entire process into a much shorter time frame. Yu Chanseok didn't use mana the same way as everyone else. He skipped storage entirely, directly absorbing and using ambient mana. The upside was that there was effectively no hard limit, since he could draw endlessly from the environment. As mana passed through his body, his blood vessels gradually strengthened, letting him handle larger and larger volumes over time. The downside was that until those vessels fully developed, the amount he could safely output at once was limited. Bursts of power were difficult. He twisted the cap off the elixir, muttering that he didn't have the luxury of waiting right now. It would be smarter to stockpile first. If he trained like this for about a month, his body should grow just enough. That was when he headed for the island. At the port, a long line had already formed. He held out his phone, received instructions, and was told he was assigned to Team 8. Moving to the boarding area, he waited as people grumbled about the delay. That was when Han Sang-ah called out to him. He glanced at her and commented that her hair looked a lot calmer than last time. She replied that it was just because there wasn't any static this time. She added that they were on the same team, which was good, and suggested they work together during the mission. He asked why he would. She answered honestly because he was stronger than her and she could learn something from watching him. He joked that his shoulders might pop out from carrying her around. She frowned, warning him that chronic dislocations were dangerous, and asked why he was using a spear if that was the case. He realized she couldn't take a joke. A man raised his voice, telling everyone to focus. Since all members of Team 8 were present, the mission briefing would begin. Noting that some participants were first-time hunters, he explained the terminology. Corruption zones were classified as Grade 1, 2, 3, or unranked, with Grade 1 being the most dangerous. The first corruption zone to appear in an area received an additional designation, Alpha. The Alpha zone on the island was located at a church on the northeastern end of Insari. It remained unranked for now, but zones only grew stronger over time. Approaching it was strongly discouraged. Their mission was to patrol assigned areas, identify newly formed zones, and eliminate them. One member asked if they were really running elimination missions with rookies on board. The boat began to approach the island, and several hunters commented that they could feel the chill even from this far out. Yu Chanseok said they were exaggerating. As he and Han Sang-ah disembarked, someone blew a whistle and announced that the island's interior was being monitored by an offshore command center. If assistance was needed, they were to make contact immediately. With that, the hunters were wished good luck. The team started discussing plans. Yu Chanseok said they could cover both target areas within a week. Several members turned to stare at him, asking what he meant. He explained they should establish a base at Hagasa and operate from there. People questioned who he even was, saying they didn't recognize him, and asked why he'd picked that location of all places. He explained that from Hagasa they could see one target directly, and from the mountain peak the other was also visible. There were ruins of old temple buildings there, perfect for lodging. He thought it was obvious. They argued there were plenty of closer locations and that climbing a mountain risked being surrounded. He replied calmly that they weren't fighting thousands of enemies, so how exactly did someone surround a mountain? The objections continued. Some said they didn't want to follow a hunter with no experience. Yu Chanseok thought that no matter the world, people like this always existed. In the end, the group split up to operate separately. As they moved through the forest, Han Sang-ah followed Yu Chanseok, and another man tagged along as well. Yu Chanseok noticed that this guy's mana was actually higher than Han Sang-ah's. His name was Kim Minyi. He asked Minyi why he was following them. Minyi said it was both of their first missions, and he didn't feel right letting two rookies operate alone. Yu Chanseok thanked him, saying at least there was one decent person here. Then he abruptly stopped. He told them to wait and quietly look ahead. Peeking through the brush, they spotted a group of goblins roaming the area. Minyi whispered that they should go around. There were too many, at least 50. Yu Chanseok told him to stay calm and asked what his trait was. Minyi stared at him like he was insane and asked if he was seriously planning to fight them. Yu Chanseok repeated the question. Minyi answered that his trait was fire. When asked what skill he was most confident in, he said fireball. Yu Chanseok told him to prepare it and wait for his signal. Han Sang-ah asked what she should do. Minyi couldn't believe she was going along with this, pointing out it was 3 versus 50. He suggested calling the others again. Yu Chanseok shook his head. They wouldn't make it in time. The rest of the team was searching the coastline. Even if they heard the call, there was no guarantee they'd arrive quickly. Worse, if they waited and the goblins scattered, they could threaten other hunters. Minyi reluctantly agreed. In that case, they had to deal with it here and now. And when outnumbered, the answer was an ambush. There wasn't much time, so Yu Chanseok explained quickly. Minyi would strike the center with a fireball. He would cover the sides. He gave Han Sang-ah her role as well. Minyi was stunned. The plan was precise, accounting for multiple outcomes. It didn't feel like something a rookie would come up with. It felt like the thinking of someone who'd fought for years. He wondered who Yu Chanseok really was. The goblins remained unaware. Minyi jumped out from cover and launched the fireball. It exploded among them, incinerating one goblin alive. Minyi shouted that he needed a moment before casting another. Yu Chanseok told him that was fine, fire as soon as he was ready. As Minyi prepared the next spell, Yu Chanseok charged forward, saying that in combat, efficiency mattered above all else, and that role division was essential. A goblin lunged at him, but he dealt with it instantly. Until the next fireball was ready, he'd handle the rest and keep them away from Minyi. He couldn't handle all of them alone. That was why roles mattered. Han Sang-ah drew her blade and cut down 3 goblins in a flash, barely using any power. Minyi shouted that the next fireball was ready. Yu Chanseok told him to fire. He'd dodge on his own. The explosion tore through the clearing. Yu Chanseok leapt backward through the air, gripping his spear tightly. They needed to finish the rest now. Some time later, he drove the spear into the ground. It was over. He praised them for the good work. That was when Minyi raised a gun behind his head. Yu Chanseok asked calmly what he was doing. Minyi told him to step aside for a moment. Yu Chanseok couldn't help wondering why the hell he had ended up striking such an awkward pose, especially when he had genuinely thought he was about to get shot. Instead of freezing, he started firing straight into the monsters, which immediately made Yunseok snap at him, asking what the hell he thought he was doing. Minyi explained it calmly, saying that once the mission was over and the area was secure, the scrap dealer they had contracted would come retrieve the microchip implanted in the monster. Chanseok asked what that even meant, and Minyi told him it was difficult to directly recover byproducts from monster corpses since they were huge, heavy, and a pain to transport. So instead, they implanted chips like this. Once the mission ended, the dealers came in, collected anything that looked valuable, appraised it, sold it, took their contracted commission, retrieved their chips, and sent the remaining profit to the family of the hunter who died. Chanseok asked if they could even trust people like that, and Minyi said that was exactly why it was important to find a good dealer and sign a solid contract. Then he added that what Chanseok had done earlier was insane, saying he never imagined someone could take down that many monsters alone. While they were still talking, something far larger dropped down from above and swung at them. Chanseok reacted instantly, shoving Minyi out of the way. He asked if he was all right, and the two of them quickly braced themselves for another fight. The monster grinned at them, and Chanseok muttered that from what he could tell, it was probably a mid-boss or something close to it. To him, it looked like a damn chupacabra, some kind of human bat-goblin freak. He admitted this was actually bad. Judging by the mana pouring off it, this thing was on a completely different level compared to the earlier monsters. He told them not to interfere and said he would handle it himself. If that thing was really targeting them, there was no way they would be able to escape together. Han Sang-ah and Minyi argued that if they fought together and bought time, they might be able to retreat and report the situation once an opening appeared. Chanseok cut them off and told them he wasn't going to repeat himself. If they didn't fall back, they were going home in body bags. The chill in his voice made them freeze. He said it was better if he handled it alone. That way, he could use his paradox flame without worrying about allies getting caught in it and finish things as fast as possible. He told the monster to start already. The ground shattered as the fight began. From a distance, Minyi hesitated, saying maybe they should help because it looked like Chanseok was being pushed back. Sang-ah shook her head and said there was no need. Even though it looked like he was retreating, he hadn't been hit a single time. Every time his spear pierced the monster, black flames clung to its body. She had no idea what the hell those flames were, but the more they accumulated, the slower the monster became. Even when it seemed like he was struggling early on, that was clearly no longer the case. At this point, he was practically playing with it. She couldn't believe he was supposed to be a rookie like her. No matter how she looked at it, it made no sense. The monster lunged again and Chanseok stepped back, creating some distance. He tightened his grip on his spear and suddenly threw it straight up into the air. Both Sang-ah and Minyi stared at him in confusion. As the monster charged directly at him, they shouted for him to watch out, but just as it reached him, its body froze mid-motion before crashing to the ground. The spear fell back down from above, piercing straight through it and pinning it in place. Chanseok said that for it to keep moving after burning through all its physical strength meant he needed to end it now. They watched as he finished it off, and Minyi couldn't understand what he had just seen. It had looked like Chanseok was being pushed back, but before he could even process it, the monster was dead. He asked how that was possible. Chanseok ignored the question and instead asked if it was normal for a monster like that to appear on the island. Minyi said he didn't know. From everything he knew, it shouldn't have been possible. Maybe if it were an erosion zone with an erosion unit, but then it would have to be at least grade 3. Chanseok recalled the grading system from earlier and said he remembered hearing that the zone was ungraded. If that was the case, then it wasn't ungraded anymore. It meant the alpha erosion unit had been upgraded. Sang-ah looked shocked and said the briefing clearly stated that wasn't the case. Chanseok told her to think rationally. If it wasn't grade 3, there was no way to explain the situation they were in right now. Minyi added that the difference between ungraded and grade 3 was massive, like heaven and earth. If that was true, almost no hunters would make it out alive. Minyi said they needed to go help the other hunters. With Chanseok's level of skill, even a grade 3 shouldn't be impossible. Chanseok refused. He asked how he was supposed to find and save every hunter scattered across the island by himself. He had limits. Their mission wasn't to rescue hunters in crisis, but to confirm and eliminate the monsters that spawned. He couldn't be expected to do anything beyond that. Sang-ah asked him what he thought he would feel like if he were in their position. He asked what she meant, and she said that surely he would feel wronged and resentful. If that was the case, then shouldn't he go save them? Chanseok said it wasn't that he didn't understand human emotions. He was talking about results. Deaths were inevitable in this world. No matter what someone thought or felt, they would still die when facing an unavoidable death. He said wavering in a hopeless situation would only get you killed. You couldn't survive in a world like this with that kind of mindset. They headed to the abandoned building he had suggested as their base. Chanseok confirmed it was empty with no trace of monsters. Sang-ah said that was lucky. He asked Minyi if he noticed anything else, but Minyi said it was too dark to see much. The only thing he could clearly see were the lights marking the locations of other hunters. Chanseok frowned and said those lights were dangerous because they revealed your position. If it was just small fry, it might not matter, but if something like that earlier monster appeared, it would be a disaster. He decided to send out a warning message, informing everyone about the monster they had faced and the possibility that the zone had become grade 3. They settled inside the building. Minyi drew a diagram explaining the situation. Chanseok said that if they destroyed the erosion unit's core, all the creatures would disappear. Minyi confirmed it. Without the energy from the unit, the zone itself would vanish. Chanseok said it was simple enough. That was his goal now. Sang-ah started to fall asleep, followed shortly by Minyi. Chanseok left behind a piece of equipment that would sound an alarm if a monster approached, saying that should be enough. He had already checked the erosion unit's location during the briefing, so things might go smoothly. As he moved through the island, he suddenly stopped and muttered that he had a feeling things were going too well. A growl echoed through the woods. He assumed it was the big one from earlier. But when he slowly turned around, he found himself staring at a massive bat-like creature looming over him. Meanwhile, inside the Hunters Association's situation room on the island, panic was spreading fast. Team 5's hunter signals had gone completely dark, which meant the chances of them being alive were slim at best. Reports kept pouring in, saying the monsters were moving in an organized pattern rather than randomly. Casualty confirmations followed one after another. One of the staff slammed his desk, asking what the hell was going on. This was supposed to be an unranked erosion zone, yet everything about the situation screamed emergency. They needed to reinforce the active hunters immediately and submit urgent requests for support. Another operator suddenly reported that someone was approaching the erosion core itself. The room went quiet. The man in charge asked who it was, saying they needed to contact them right away and tell them to stop. The response made him freeze. The hunter heading toward the core was Yu Chanseok, a member of Team 8. The staffer immediately recognized the name as the hunter who first noticed that the zone had been upgraded. He ordered them to connect to Chanseok's terminal at once and confirm he was still alive. An erosion core upgrading like this had never been officially confirmed before. If that was true, Chanseok had figured it out first, and now he was charging straight toward the source itself. That meant he might already know the answer. The connection went through. The screen showed Chanseok sprinting through the terrain with the giant bat monster chasing after him. He shouted that the thing was way too damn fast, much faster than he expected. He started yelling at the team for not properly investigating the zone, demanding to know how they could screw up the ranking this badly. He kept flaming everyone on the line, and the staff debated muting him, but at least they had confirmed he was alive. Chanseok said his current paradox flame didn't have enough raw power to outright kill strong individuals. Against tougher enemies, he had no choice but to slowly burn down their vitality and finish them with his spear. The problem was that this bastard had no intention of slowing down. On top of that, he had already drawn too much mana from the island earlier while fighting the giant bat during the day, leaving him far weaker than usual. He couldn't leave the island either. That meant he had to find a place where he could draw mana directly. He spotted something ahead and said he had found it, explaining that he followed the areas where mana density was highest. As he leapt toward a portal, the giant bat dog creature lunged after him. He looked back at it and told it to keep up, continuing to taunt it as he jumped straight inside. Back in the situation room, they reported that his signal had been lost. That meant he had entered the erosion core. Inside, Chanseok immediately realized how different it was from what he expected. He remembered them saying that unranked and grade 3 zones didn't spread this quickly. If this space was already this vast, he couldn't help wondering just how massive grade 1 and grade 2 zones must be. The monster crept up behind him. Chanseok clicked his tongue and said that since it followed him all the way here, it was time to finish things between them. He wasn't the obsessive type after all. The monster roared and Chanseok explained one of the biggest problems with his paradox flame. It spread to every living thing except himself, allies included. If it reached a level he couldn't control, he wouldn't be able to use it at all. That drawback usually made it dangerous, but since he was fighting alone now, it didn't matter. The downside was completely nullified. He said the real fight was starting now. Mana began swirling violently around his chest, concentrating near his heart. He said that the mana he had forcibly sucked out of the monster was spreading through every corner of his body, widening his meridians and making them tougher. He exhaled sharply and admitted that it felt much better than he expected. The monster screamed as its mana was ripped away, its body shaking in agony. Chanseok noticed ripples spreading across the water beneath his feet and immediately understood what was happening. When he looked around, he saw himself surrounded by a swarm of the bat creatures from earlier. He sighed and said it was a shame, because overwhelming him with numbers wasn't going to mean anything anymore. In an instant, the paradox flame erased them, turning their bodies into nothing. He said he was several times stronger than before, but still nowhere near the level he used to be. He wondered where the core was, recalling Minyi saying that the core was usually the strongest entity in the space. Then he heard a voice say, "Fire," followed by "went out," just as something lunged at him from behind. He twisted his body and barely dodged the attack as it smashed into the ground. He muttered that it had waited for his flames to burn out and even announced it out loud. That alone proved it. This thing was the core and it was on a completely different level. He said that at this point, he could probably manage a 4-hit combo. He charged in, swinging his spear wildly to distract it. His first thrust went straight toward its chest, but it blocked the attack. Even so, the impact wasn't meaningless. The monster's weapon began to chip. Chanseok explained that his spear technique was called the dual moon spear. As the spear pierced through the monster's side, a blue trail formed along the attack path. That trail perfectly mimicked the original strike, repeating it 4 times. It was a simple chain technique. But when those blue trails struck just a beat later, it turned into a tricky rhythm that was hard to dodge. Against delayed attacks like that, enemies were bound to slip up eventually. Now that it had been struck, Chanseok closed the distance and said it was over. He unleashed the technique again, but this time he thrust 6 times in rapid succession, each one carrying the effect of the dual moon spear. The monster let out one final scream before its body began to fade from existence. Chanseok admitted he hadn't expected to gain anything from it, but suddenly a box appeared in his hands. He opened it and his eyes widened in surprise. Back in the situation room, chaos reached its peak. Reports confirmed that the erosion zones were spreading outward from the central island. Team 9's hunter signals had gone dark as well. The man overseeing the operation stared blankly at the screens as shouting echoed around him. In his head, it was already over. Unless some kind of miracle happened, all he could do was stand there and watch people get slaughtered. Then someone spoke up, saying that a message had arrived from Yu Chanseok, the hunter who entered the erosion core. The man snapped out of it and demanded to know what it said. The operator said he would put it on the screen immediately. The message was short and clear. The Alpha erosion core had been cleared as of this moment. For a second, nobody reacted. Then confirmations started pouring in. Field teams reported that the monsters were disappearing. The zones were collapsing. The man muttered that a miracle had actually happened, asking how something like this was even possible. Outside, Chanseok looked up at the sky and commented that the air felt really nice right now. Elsewhere on the island, Han Sang-ah was pushing herself to the absolute limit. Lightning tore through clusters of bat monsters as she went all out, her wrist visibly shaking from exhaustion. She had to grip her sword with both hands just to keep it steady. She said there were way more of them than during the day, and on top of that, Chanseok had disappeared. Minyi stood back to back with her, asking if she thought they would make it out alive. Their building had been completely demolished, leaving them exposed. Sang-ah answered honestly, saying Minyi was already at his limit, and she didn't know how much longer she could hold on either. It wasn't even the strongest monster they were facing, just an endless flood of smaller ones. The monsters started to twitch erratically. Han Sang-ah stepped forward to close the distance, but her legs suddenly gave out. She realized she was losing sensation. Minyi shouted her name, but he couldn't afford to look away as another monster lunged at him. Then everything went eerily quiet. When Han Sang-ah slowly opened her eyes, what she saw left her stunned. The monsters around them were dissolving into black mist, one after another. Eventually, the surviving hunters regrouped. Chanseok walked in and casually remarked that there were a lot of injured people, asking if things had gotten rough while he was gone. The other members of Team 8 stared at him in disbelief before it fully sank in that he was the one who had cleared the erosion zone by himself. Minyi waved at him, saying he was shocked when he received Chanseok's message and asked how he even came up with the idea of taking on the source alone. Chanseok said something about how his heart moved before his body, about wanting to protect his fellow hunters or something along those lines. Han Sang-ah and Minyi immediately realized he was full of shit. Still, Chanseok played along, acting like a decent guy and saying that if he had known things would turn out like this, he would have gone earlier. A man approached him and said it was nice to finally meet him. He introduced himself as Zhang Tai, a branch manager of the Northern District Operating Court. Chanseok recognized the name right away, saying he was the one who told him to come here in the first place. Zhang Tai asked if he had a moment, explaining that the mayor wanted to meet with him. Chanseok replied that ordering people around seemed to be a common trait among old people. As an afterthought, he added that now that he thought about it, the contract never mentioned the reward for clearing a Grade 3 zone. Another man stepped in and introduced himself as Pilyi, a communication and cooperation officer. He escorted Chanseok inside, saying the mayor was eagerly awaiting the meeting and had been shocked when he received the island report at dawn. The mayor had even canceled his entire morning schedule because of it. Chanseok said they could have taken their time, since it wasn't like he had done anything special. Pilyi replied that a rookie hunter destroying a Grade 3 source solo hadn't happened since the very first hunter, Grant Sr. Chanseok said he understood why. Even for him, it had been tough alone. Anyone else capable of doing that would have to be a real monster. Pilyi announced Chanseok's arrival, and the mayor thanked him for coming despite the weather. He introduced himself as Park Jayan and told Chanseok to have a seat while he asked Pilyi to bring coffee. Jayan said Chanseok had done a great service for the country. As mayor, the island had been a massive headache. It needed to be dealt with, but budget limitations made it difficult to hire expensive guilds. Chanseok said he must be relieved now that it was solved at a low cost. Jayan agreed, saying that was exactly why he brought it up. He also mentioned hearing that this was Chanseok's first request. Chanseok confirmed it. Jayan said that to think someone so talented started their journey in his city made him proud as mayor. Jayan went on about the country, mentioning how the airport in Incheon handled enormous logistics flows, attracting countless foreign investors. With so much capital flowing through the city, opportunities were everywhere. He said he would make sure Chanseok's path as a hunter would be smooth and filled with success. Chanseok recalled Zhang Tai asking him earlier about his reason for becoming a hunter. He answered that if a toilet was clogged with shit, someone had to unclog it. Zhang Tai said he understood, but added that Chanseok would likely become famous in the future. With fame came commercials and all kinds of offers. Chanseok said it sounded like he was worried fame would ruin him. Zhang Tai replied that many promising hunters got drunk on attention and forgot their duties. It was only natural. He pointed out that just across the ceasefire line, dangerous monsters roamed erosion zones. Korea was the only safe place left and was called a sanctuary for a reason, but even that sanctuary was being influenced by money. What Chanseok accomplished was tremendous, and many people in desperate situations would take interest in him. He just wanted Chanseok to remain a beacon of hope. Chanseok said he wondered how much money would be offered after receiving such a perfectly packaged speech. Unfortunately for them, he had lived through too many years and endured the same bullshit to be swayed by something like this. He told Jayan that if he was offering that much support, there had to be something he wanted in return, like using him to boost approval ratings for re-election. Jayan looked surprised but quickly recovered, saying Chanseok was well informed. Chanseok replied that smartphones made everything easy. He knew Jayan's term ended early next year and that re-election looked unlikely. Reading the room, it was obvious. Jayan admitted that he needed City Hall approval for this request. Chanseok pointed out that despite the public notice, it was true that a rookie needed the mayor's permission to enter. If Jayan framed it right, he could claim Chanseok as talent he discovered and take credit for everything. Jayan continued, saying that thanks to the city's infrastructure, he had strong ties with many domestic and overseas companies. For example, the contract for the coffee brand they were drinking was ending soon. Chanseok's face could replace it, and that was only the beginning. Chanseok slammed his cup down and asked if Jayan thought he looked cheap. Jayan asked what he meant. Chanseok said the world was desperate for a new face to brighten things up, but everything Jayan claimed he could give was something Chanseok would take on his own anyway. Jayan said he could selectively provide safe, high-paying requests. Chanseok replied that it was a terrible offer and told him to congratulate the current coffee model since it looked like their contract would be renewed. Elsewhere under a bridge, a man knelt before someone else and said the island test had failed, apologizing. The hooded figure said it couldn't be helped. The kneeling man added that there was some good news. He had obtained footage from the hunter qualification exam. The clip showed Yu Chanseok fighting Han Sanga. The hooded figure watched it and laughed, saying it was pretty impressive. And that's where we will leave the things off for today. If you want to know what happens next, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part.